And so now for our procedure. So we actually have participants come in for a screening before they do the test day, because we want to make sure that they're meeting the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And that's important for our study questions, but also for the safety of the participant. So if they pass screening, which we have assumed that they have if they're starting here, we have them come in for a medical check as soon as they arrive for the day. And that's just to make sure that they're medically fit still to receive the drug. So that's mostly blood pressure, making sure there's not been any changes to their health record. And then we feed them lunch, because previous literature has shown that the insulin's more effective if someone has been fed already. And then we take them through the fMRI, which I'll explain more. We have them do some cognitive task, and then we give them a cookie snack around an hour and a half later. And then we do some cognitive tasks. And all throughout the day, we are giving them questionnaires, which are represented by these computer screens. And that's because we want to constantly be asking how they're feeling for their physical symptoms, to see if the drug is having bad effects on a participant, but also be querying their appetite throughout the day. And we also take measures of blood throughout, as you can see by the blood drops, and that's glucose and insulin. So we want to look at their glucose to make sure that insulin's not causing their blood glucose to drop too low. It shouldn't be, but you just want to make sure. And also we're looking at insulin to see if the drug is entering the periphery and not the central areas that we want in the brain. So I don't show that data, but it all went in the direction that we expected, where it didn't lower blood glucose and it didn't increase the body insulin either. So that's good. It means it went to the brain. Okay, and so we didn't see any effects on cognition. And for this reason, I'm not going to go over our cognitive task, and I'm just going to focus more on the intake measures and the fMRI, which I will explain to you now what we've used. So we fed them, like I said, the lunch. And so for the UK, this was done in the UK, and they really like to eat like cheese sandwiches with just butter. I think we would have a grilled cheese, essentially grilled cheese without being cooked. So it's not like an amazing meal, but it fills you up and they like it enough. So for that reason, we served it, and we would estimate everyone's calories that they were going to receive based off of their height and weight and how much they exercise. So they would get 40% of their daily needs in this lunch. And the idea was that they would get full to where they could receive the drug after it. And then I think actually it's 2 hours later, an hour and a half to 2 hours later, they receive the cookie snack. And so the idea behind this is that, okay, you've eaten somewhat relatively recently, but you're not like stuffed to where you're going to reject a cookie, but you're not really hungry, to where it's a model of that kind of homeostatic needing to eat because you're hungry. So we give them these broken up cookies that would be like Chips Ahoy for America. We tell them that this is a taste test. We're not measuring, we don't want them to know that we're measuring their food, because they might act differently, but that you can eat as much of it as you would like. And so we can use this as a model of reward by looking at how many cookies that they consume and how they rate the liking of it. So that what we call the palatability. And that would be more of a reward measure. And then we're also giving them self-report questionnaires all throughout the day, as I said earlier, querying how they're feeling physically, emotionally, and their appetite. And then we take them to the MRI scanner. So some of you might have had an MRI, but basically it's this giant magnet that you see here. It's very expensive. And we tell participants that we're going to lie them down. So they lie down on the bed here. And then there's this screen that they can see whilst they're in the scanner. And that's where we're giving them a task. And in our case, we were asking them to rate using this dedicated button box here. So they're lying down and they're responding with their hand to the task by saying how appealing they find each image. And we're showing them food images here that are kind of really tempting and delicious. And we're showing them non-food images to have a kind of comparison to. So we can see, because of the magnet, we're able to see the brain's anatomy. And then whenever there's increased blood flow to a certain area, we can interpret that as increased activity of the brain. So we're looking at that brain activity in response to viewing the food and non-food images while they're on insulin or placebo. Okay, and so now just for some quick little results. So for the actual cookie snack of how many grams they ate, So what we have here, so the light gray is placebo and the dark gray is insulin. So the lean participants are here on the left. So each dot is a participant's data, and then these squares are the means. So you can see that the means are actually quite similar between the insulin and placebo. So insulin wasn't really affecting the snack intake for lean women. And then for women with obesity, though, it was significantly lowering the intake of cookies whenever they had insulin instead of placebo, as you can see here. And then when we ask them to rate how delicious they find the cookie, so what happens is they try one bite of cookie and we say, okay, rate on a scale of 0 to 100, how appealing you're finding this cookie. And we found that for lean women, again, there was really no difference between the placebo and insulin. But for women with obesity, they rated it as significantly less palatable when they had insulin compared to placebo. And this was only seen at the beginning of the meal. So here's our plot for at the end of the meal. And we didn't see any significant differences between lean or women with obesity in between conditions. So we're just seeing this kind of decrease in liking of the snack at the beginning of the meal. Okay. And so this is a really massive plot, and I'm sorry, but I'll just go through it. Basically, what we have here in this first quadrant is the lean participants data. So these are on these questionnaires that we asked them. And the key takeaways here are that this is our appetite. So it's a measure of like how much do you want to eat and how full or hungry you are. So there really weren't any differences between the insulin and placebo. But other things to draw out, because we want to know if this is, we're also thinking about this being a therapeutic drug for obesity, we need to make sure that it's not causing these appetite reducing effects because it's making people sick or depressed, because people can not eat if they feel either way. So the negative effects is more of a measure of their negative emotion like sadness, and that wasn't changed between the insulin or placebo, and nor were their physical effects, so like how lightheaded you're feeling or faint. So that's a good thing. That's nice that it wasn't changed. And for people with obesity, we see the same thing, that they weren't really feeling any negative physical symptoms, which is great. But they did reduce their self-reported appetite with insulin. So they said that they were less desiring to eat and they were less hungry when they received insulin. And now these last two plots are all about mood. So we call it negative affect and positive affect, or placebo for lean women. And it was the same for positive mood here. But for people with obesity, insulin significantly increased their positive mood throughout the day. So that's a good thing. And now for our last results that I'm going to show you, this is the MRI task that we mentioned earlier, where they have to rate how appealing they find these images. We saw that for both this time, so previously it's all been for people with obesity, but lean and women with obesity had increased activation in the insula of the brain. And so this region has been associated with kind of connecting information from the environment with internal signals. So this is called interoception when it's your internal body information, and external as exteroception. And we find that the insula is more involved in this. So what we're thinking is because they're already full at this point, and that basically insulin is telling the brain that we've already, consumed food and you're full. And so it's making the pictures less appealing looking. So pretty much decreasing the attractiveness of food while looking at this task. And that is pretty much it for the results. So I'm just going to summarize. So we saw that intranasal insulin decreased the cookie intake and self-reported palatability and appetite. And what's interesting is that this was only for women with obesity. And it also improved mood, again, only for women with obesity. And we saw an increased activation of insula in response to food images. So this is suggestive of this decreased attractiveness of food. And we didn't see any effects on cognition, which was kind of interesting because we thought we would. And we saw that women with obesity are more sensitive. And this is interesting because it's suggesting that insulin might be normalizing some of those processes and kind of bringing it to that more looking like what lean people are showing with their appetite. So it suggests that actually intranasal insulin could be a viable new candidate for obesity treatment and weight loss drugs. Of course, you're going to have clinical trials to assess the efficacy. This is only one dosage, but it is promising, to say the least. And more importantly, for what we were trying to answer with this question and this whole study is that we find that appetite is a very multifaceted brain to body process. So because the participants were already full when they're receiving the drug, it looks like that fullness is decreasing the reward of these palatable foods and images. So they're eating less. And it might be because insulin is kind of signaling even more so that, okay, we've already consumed food. And whereas people with obesity might be less sensitive to that prior to receiving this insulin, the insulin is now allowing them to kind of like feel really satiated to where perhaps these more palatable food cues that would normally grab their attention isn't as much. So it does suggest that these homeostatic mechanisms are interacting with reward, and it's important for knowing what future drugs could be doing for obesity. And in fact, it's really interesting because there's been these new drugs that have hit the market, and it's been really exciting in the obesity field because it's finally a drug that seems to be working quite well without too bad of side effects. Of course, every drug has side effects, but they're basically GLP-1 agonists, which means like they increase that signal. And these GLP-1 actually stimulates the release of insulin, and it's causing people to kind of feel full. So they're not wanting to eat as much because they feel full, which is really in support of the findings that we're seeing. And so this can tell us even more information about new drugs and appetite control in general to help with, future therapies. And yeah, well, that's it, guys. Thank you. And it for me. Thank you very much for listening.